All right, welcome in. I'm the Kodiak, and today I am here to talk about ranking each team's run game heading into the year of 2024, ranking each team's rushing attack, and how I think their rushing offenses will fare going into next year. But before we get into it, leave a like if you enjoy, subscribe if you're not already. You can always wait until the end, and hopefully, I will have earned your rating and subscription. And also leave a comment because I've really enjoyed interacting with you guys throughout this little mini series on my channel. So, let's get right into it. So, at 32, we have the Dallas Cowboys. And the main reason why they're at 32 is, yeah, their O-line is getting better. They're trying to rebuild the Great Wall of Dallas, and they did that by taking Guyton in the first round this year. They have a lot of things going for them on the offensive line, and they were actually fourth in run block win rate last year from ESPN. But at the same time, one, Mike McCarthy is your coordinator, and two, one of the biggest issues I have with this Cowboys team, or actually the entire reason they're down here to begin with, is because this running back room is it's like a joke. I'm just like, Ezekiel Elliott is your RB1 going into 2024, and Zeke's game, he has aged well as a running back as far as like career longevity, but as far as when he stopped being Ezekiel Elliott, I remember in 2020 how drastic it looked when he dropped off. And he's been on the Cowboys for 7 years, and being the RB1 on a team that always puts up a lot of points is going to kind of mask your true ability. And he carved out a role last year with the Patriots, but honestly, he wasn't anything more than replacement level. And behind him, you have some guys like Rico Dowdle. Rico Dowdle has actually looked kind of explosive. Deuce Vaughn just simply might be too small to be effective in the NFL. And Royce Freeman, who he is the third string running back on he's probably been around on every NFL team by this point. But yeah, going forward with the Dallas Cowboys, I'm just like, what is this? And that's the main reason why I have them last going into next year. Now, another team whose run game is absolutely anemic is Tampa Bay. And their run game last year, 3.4 yards per carry, 32nd in the league by point 0.2. And my goodness, that is awful. Like, I have it listed on there because my eyes went like this when I saw that stat. And I don't know, Tampa Bay, it just never ever seems like they have a good run game. And I think it's partially because Jason Licht, he does not focus on the run game. He's a part of the camp that's like, well, passing attack is more important in the modern NFL. And when you have Evans and Godwin, that can get you far. So just by themselves. And then Baker obviously had a resurgent year. But even in offensive linemen, they don't really look for run blocking offensive linemen. Like, the only trait they really care about, like, wholeheartedly, the only trait they really go for in their linemen when they're scouting and when they're developing is pass protection. And hey, I get it. I get it for the modern NFL. And it's very rare for him to invest in the running back position, but I think they did need more behind Rachaad White, and they knew it too. But Rachaad White, he's also a player who, coming out of college, I didn't really know how he'd fare as a pure runner, but I did know that his hands were pretty good. And what do you know? In the NFL, his hands are pretty good, and he's been a very bad runner so far. I don't think it's all his fault. I think it's mostly due to the fact that the Buccaneers' offensive scheme just pretty much never favors running the ball to begin with. And behind him, they added Bucky Irving. Bucky Irving was pretty him. So I'm excited that they did add someone behind Rachaad White, and Irving was actually a pretty good running back. He was my pre-draft RB2 at one point, but then I was like, Brooks should probably be my RB1. And behind him, you have Chase Edmonds, who has been through, I think, like 3 major injuries at this point. But hey, sometimes NFL players just play, and that's going to be a big theme of this video in general, is that, there are some guys on an NFL roster still, and I'm just like, how? But then NFL players just play. And then Sean Tucker, who he got 9 carries for 8 yards against the Bears last year, and I don't remember him doing anything else. I was pretty excited about him coming into the NFL in 2023. He has that medical issue during the combine. His stock drops. Maybe he wasn't that good to begin with. Now, 30, we're going with the Carolina Panthers. Speaking of the offensive coordinator, who is the architect of that goated Tampa Bay rushing attack last year that averaged 3.4 yards per carry, we get Dave Canales. Now, what I will say about Carolina is that Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders, that was about as unexciting and anemic as a run game as you could have had last year as your RB1 and RB2. But they did add Jonathan Brooks. Brooks was the first running back taken in this draft, and interesting little tidbit of information. Jerry Jones said that Jonathan Brooks had the best pre-draft interview of any prospect he's ever hosted. And I don't really know why you'd say that publicly, especially after round one. And I don't know, the other flip side of it is I don't know why you wouldn't take him in the first round if you had him graded that highly. But regardless, there could be a differentiation between how you view a player and how comfortable you feel taking them. But that's an interesting little tidbit about Brooks there. But he was the successor to Bijan and Roshan at Texas, and he was pretty good. So Carolina added him in the middle of the second round, and their offensive line, they did add some pieces. So hopefully they can assist Bryce Young this year. I do believe they added Hunt and Lewis to go along the offensive line. And hopefully Ekwonu can develop and be the player that we all thought he could when he was coming out of the draft. So this is going to be a huge year for Carolina. And whether or not they can get their run game going, not really optimistic. And by the way, the Miles Sanders contract looks worse and worse every day. Now we're going with the Patriots. Now, there are not a lot of guys on this roster that can just pure run the ball other than Kevin Harris. Kevin Harris was a great runner at South Carolina. He basically tore up the SEC, and I think he had a broken elbow while he was doing it or something ridiculous like that. I don't know if my memory serves me correct. That's probably not right, but I know he had something going on. But Ramondre is a great receiving back, and Antonio Gibson as well. But the problem with Antonio Gibson is he has never really gotten going in the NFL. He's been more of a pass catching back, and whenever he has had opportunities in Washington, he just never really has materialized. It just hasn't happened for whatever reason. And the Patriots last year, they had a bad offensive line, but they still finished 10th in the league in run block win rate. So that was pretty surprising in itself. And they are still going to go through some growing pains on the offensive side of the ball. I know Alex Van Pelt came over from Cleveland, and Cleveland last year when Nick Chubb went down, every running back had comical efficiency. Look at Jerome Ford. I'm pretty sure he averaged like 3.4 yards per carry last year. And they had some other guys too sprinkled in there too, like Kareem Hunt, and I can't even remember at this point. But the Patriots, I'm a little bearish on what the run game is going to look like next year. I think the offense is just in for a tough year in general, unless Drake May is better than we thought, which is definitely possible. But Brissett and May could both have this team playing better than we think. Now, 28, we are going with Washington, and I'm not sure who's going to be the RB1 because at the same time, this looks like a pretty ugly 1A, 1B, but Eckler can still be effective. Like I've been saying, NFL players, sometimes they just play, and they did sign him to a 2-year deal. But also, B-Rob did have some moments last year in the receiving game, not really the run game, but I don't know. I didn't really take receiving back ability into account while I was making this. Like, I don't know. On some teams, I kind of did, but ultimately, I did how I feel about these guys as pure runners. And as far as B-Rob being a pure runner, I don't feel great about him. And this is still a young offense. Now, what I think kept the Commanders from being last was one, the Cowboys depth chart, and two, the fact that they added Jaden Daniels, which does matter when it comes to when we talk about the overall run game of a team because there's a chance he gets 10, 11 carries a game. And I think that's a really bad idea, especially for a rookie quarterback. But look at what Kyler Murray did, and look at what Kingsbury did there. He completely designed the offense around Kyler. Like, say what you want about Kingsbury, but he knew how to tailor his offense to Kyler, or he didn't know how to, but he just did. And Kyler Murray, he got a lot of rushing opportunities. So I think Daniels is going to get the same here, and I think that is going to help the efficiency of the rushing attack in general. By the way, 4.4 yards per carry in 2023. I don't know. That was interesting, but again, this is still an offensive line it needs some work to do. And then they have Chris Rodriguez, who was described. I only knew of him because of how he was at Kentucky, and I was reading an article about him last year. I can't remember who it was from, but they said that Chris Rodriguez was the even worse version of Benny Snell coming into the league. And there you go. Now, 27, we're going with the Las Vegas Raiders, and their offensive play caller is Luke Getsy, who did coordinate the Chicago Bears to a second place finish last year in overall yards per carry. Spoiler alert until we get to the Bears. But how much of that was just Fields, taking off and running and getting a 50-yard touchdown? I don't know. But Chicago did have some good running backs last year. Unfortunately, Getsy coming over from Chicago does not get as much talent in the backfield as he had to work with last year, this year, because they have Zamir White and then Alexander Madison and Dylan Labe. Labe coming over from, was it New Hampshire or Vermont? I know it was a school in the Northeast, and it was a really obscure school too. But either way, this offense, I think it's going to have its moments. I do. And Zamir White, he did look pretty good at the end of last year. But I don't know. It's still ultimately unproven, and we'll just see. This is kind of like a shrug in a sense, because I could see it being good, but ultimately I think everything surrounding the Raiders is just too big of a question mark on offense, and they have weapons. They have weapons. They have Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, and Michael Mayer. So the priority of this offense is not going to be to pass the ball or to run the ball. 26, we're going with the Giants. And one thing that I should note is that I've been absolutely dunking on Daniel Jones this whole offseason. I say in every video that I I can't go an entire Giants video or an entire Giants segment when I'm doing these long rankings without talking about how bad I think Daniel Jones is. But he does help the run game, and I do think Singletary next to him is going to have a pretty good year, because the running back room behind Singletary is pretty thin. Granted, they did add Tyrone Tracy, and I think you should definitely keep an eye on him, because while the Giants do have a bad offensive line, they have Andrew Thomas and who else? Tyrone Tracy last year was first in the entire, running back class amongst yards after contact per attempt. So I'm really excited about him coming into the NFL. And he does get a good chance to shine because, one, you can show how good you are after contact by getting hit in the backfield every 2 seconds. And two, the only real guy he has to compete with is Devin Singletary, who he had a good year with Houston last year, but ultimately he is just kind of like a plus Jag. Like, I don't think Singletary is a Jag necessarily. I think he's like whatever is the one step above that, because he has his limitations, but he has found a good career in the NFL. So we're going to take a little water break. And yeah, 31st in run block win rate last year. Not surprising. 29th in preseason offensive line ranking. Hopefully Dable can get this team to overperform in those categories. Okay, so I did think Spears was going to be the RB1 for Tennessee coming into this year, even though when he was at Tulane, the thing that people were most excited about was, one, seeing how a player without an ACL would fare in the NFL, and two, his receiving ability. And he did show some pretty dynamic receiving ability last year. I was pretty pleasantly surprised. Even though I had him rated really highly as a prospect, I was still a little surprised by how good he was out of the backfield, especially as a pass catching weapon. But their RB1 is Tony Pollard. They gave him 3 years and $24 million, I believe, in free agency. So the problem I have with this Titans team is that it's still a relatively young offensive line. They just added Latham, or not a young offensive line necessarily, because I know they have Cushionberry, and anyone on the left tackle side is going to be, well, yeah, it's a young offensive line. Let me retract that statement, because they do have Skoronski, and they also added Latham this year in the draft. So 2 offensive linemen back-to-back years, and they added Cushionberry in free agency. So I'm interested in Tennessee, but ultimately I think this team just needs some time to play together, to play as a unit. But as far as other guys behind Pollard and Spears, Hassan Askins and Julius Chestnut. And I haven't really talked about Pollard yet, but last year was pretty rough. A lot of people had him penciled in for maybe touching the ball 300 times last year, because what else did Dallas have at the position? It's kind of the same as this year, but add Tony Pollard. Like, that's what it was last year. And I don't know, Pollard, he looked rough. But I think it's because he was coming off that fractured fibula in the divisional round. And he looked better towards the end of the year. So I definitely don't think that, the Titans are screwed with the contract Pollard got or anything. I don't think he's going to have like a Miles Sanders level flare out. But I don't know, man. So with the New Orleans Saints, Kamara is one guy who could very well be pushed over the old man cliff this offseason. I've been saying that this year could potentially be catastrophic for the Saints, but and you look at what they did last year with Pete Carmichael and Joe Lombardi running the offense, 3.6 yards per carry. Actually, Lombardi got fired in 2022, I want to say. So yeah, last year was Pete Carmichael and Alvin Kamara. And the entire Saints offense last year just felt like it was, or at least what they were doing as far as their running back room, it felt like it was just Derek Carr check downs to Kamara, and he could not help himself. Like at certain points, it looked like on fourth down, on 4th and 10, he was looking for Kamara, and that's just absolutely inexcusable. So this is a team that's going through a lot of offensive line turmoil. You do not have Ramczyk for the year, most likely, and Jamal Williams is a complete nothing burger. Kendre Miller did show that he has some juice towards the end of the year, but I really wish he got on the field more, at least to start. But I know they did give Williams that free agent contract, so they had to get some use out of him. Either way, Kamara, this very well could be a year where he's no longer effective, especially because he's a smaller guy, and those hits are gonna uh, have some wear and tear on him, especially because he's gotten the ball a lot as he's progressed through the NFL. So again, this is a team that things could be rough if not all goes well. So 23, Minnesota Vikings. The offensive play caller is Kevin O'Connell, and last year this team's run game was absolutely disastrous. You had Alexander Madison, who people were always like, okay, yeah, he's a good backup. And he was a good backup to Dalvin Cook, but I don't know what happened to that because he got his chance to finally take the backfield. Like, Dalvin Cook was cut because he didn't provide much value to the Vikings roster anymore and certainly not worth what they were paying him. So they were just like, all right, we're going to see what we have in Alexander Madison. And people were actually really excited because at Boise State, he had been a good running back, especially in college. And when he did fill in for Dalvin Cook in 2019, 2020, 2021, he was great. But the problem is he was bad last year. And not only was he bad, like moving the ball down the field, because you can still be bad in certain areas of the field and still be good in the red zone. And he was not good in the red zone. He was not bad. He was historically bad in the red zone. So Alexander Madison absolutely face planted. But they did overhaul their run game this offseason by signing Aaron Jones from the longtime hated rival division rival in the Green Bay Packers. So I'm interested to see what happens. Aaron Jones, he's another guy who he wasn't bad this past year. He was just injured, and he did look pretty good when he did come back, but he's another guy who he's kind of getting older, and that's a theme with all these 2017 running backs came in. It's like 15 of, just the same guy came in, especially the ones who are still playing and still being effective. It seems like within the like uh 3-year window of 2023 to 2025, it seems like pretty much all of them are in the tail end of their careers. So big ups to football gods for blessing us with that running back class. It's been real, but hopefully Aaron Jones can help out Sam Darnold and J.J. McCarthy on the ground this year. And this team's offensive line has been pretty good, actually. The tackles are great, but the interior does need some work. So yeah. Now with the Green Bay Packers, and this team is absolutely crowded and loaded with skill position players. They averaged 4.3 yards per carry last year, and they did sign Josh Jacobs in free agency this year. And he strangely fell out of favor with the 2023 Raiders in a hurry, but so even after his incredible 2022, where he was probably the best running back in the league, but in 2023 and going into 2024, the Packers, they just have too many weapons on the offensive side of the ball, and this team's identity is going to run through the passing game, especially now that Jordan Love is seemingly really good. So They also did add Marshawn Lloyd, and they do have A.J. Dillon, and I don't think Dillon provides much value. And they do have Emmanuel Wilson, who looked really good in that preseason game a year ago. But back to Lloyd, he was great at USC, and I was uh, pleasantly surprised that he went to a good team with a good offense. So yeah, I could see him getting on the field sooner rather than later, especially if Jacobs is not what he once was. 21, Broncos, water break. Hey, Caesar. Caesar, you want to come here? Okay, no? All right. Sean Payton, he had this team overperforming last year because they should have finished 2-15. They should have finished 3-14. But you know what? He completely turned it around. And once he realized that Russell Wilson, so the first few weeks of the season, the offense ran through Russell Wilson. He looked good. But once teams figured out that you just need to limit the deep ball and you just need to not play the middle of the field, the Broncos' run game suffered. And Javonte Williams got like 200 carries last year, I want to say, but he averaged only 3.8 yards per carry. He was very inefficient. And this running back room, this reminds me of if you gave some dynasty nerd who drafted Isaiah Pacheco in the fourth round in his rookie draft in 2022. So he's just like, running backs don't matter. This is like, if this running back room is like if you gave a running backs don't matter truther a running back or an NFL roster and was just like, go nuts because they have Javonte Williams. They signed P. Ryan last year in free agency. They added McLaughlin as a UDFA. They added Audric Estime in the fifth round, and they added Blake Watson as well. And one of the things about Estime is I remember watching him. I can't remember against who, but I remember I was working at at the restaurant I worked at last year, and I was like, wow, did you guys see that? Like, I remember talking to the bartender right next to me, and I was just like, do you guys see that? And I don't know. Audric Estime was someone who gained a lot of steam in this draft process, but people were scared of him because they thought he ran a 4.7. But his laser time pro day was like 4.5, so the Estime agenda, whatever you want to believe, is alive and well. 74% in run block win rate. I think that's not correlating to what my eyes saw because even though the Broncos running backs were not that good last year, I didn't think the um, the run blocking was that good either. But they did rank 15th in the offensive line ratings, and they're going to be starting. They're going to keep their left guard, their left tackle, their right guard, their right tackle, but they're starting a new center, so we'll see how it goes there. P. Ryan is only good for the 3-minute drill and 2-minute drill. I don't know why I said 3-minute drill. McLaughlin, he was a good third down back, but he was, way too one-dimensional, and teams knew what they were going to do as soon as he was in the game. And yeah, Estime and Blake Watson. Blake Watson was another guy who I'm excited about. I'm excited about him coming into the NFL, but he's just not going to get carries on this team, unfortunately. Like, I think he's going to get cut, but I think he'd be the best running back on the Cowboys, that's for sure. Jaguars. Now, ETN. He had an incredible year last year. He had a resurgent year after people were kind of down on him and like, Tank Bigsby's going to take his job. But guess what happens? Tank Bigsby comes in and he does not look very good whatsoever. And it's almost at the point where I'm kind of expecting Dearness Johnson to be the Jaguars' RB2 headed into next year. But this offensive line, they've had a lot of problems. They've had a lot of turmoil. And Doug Peterson, man, if you want to save your coaching legacy, he is pretty much single-handedly destroying his reputation by letting Press Taylor call plays in Jacksonville. And he's very much defending him, and I can see a lot of leeway within this organization. This is a pretty forgiving organization to people who suck, to people who just overall don't make the right decisions. But the one thing this team does have going for it is Travis Etienne. The problem is you had Etienne last year, and Etienne had some incredible individual performances. But one, he's mainly a pass catching back, and two, look at that yards per carry, 3.6. Not good. Not what you want. Not what you want to surround Trevor Lawrence with. But again, this is a team that it mainly funnels through their weapons. I know they lost Calvin Ridley, but they did add Brian Thomas Jr., and in my opinion, that's an upgrade. They also did lose Zay Jones, and they got Gabe Davis as well. So we'll see how everything blends together with the Jaguars going into next year. But I think, all things considered, this run game is something that still needs work. Now, the Seattle Seahawks, and the one question I have of all the guys we've never seen call plays in the NFL before, we've never seen Grubb in the NFL to begin with. So even though he was the offensive coordinator at Washington, I what is the identity of this team? That remains to be seen. But the projected running back one going into next year is Kenneth Walker. And I actually made a video on my channel last summer saying that I thought Charbonnet was just a better overall back than Kenneth Walker. And I'm still not really that big of a fan of Kenneth Walker. But Charbonnet and McIntosh, this backfield could get real messy, especially because the Seahawks are going into next year with PFF's 31st ranked offensive line. What is it? It wouldn't be a Seahawks video if I wasn't able to talk about the fact that they perennially have a bad line. I hope they fix it. I hope they get better. And genuinely, even though I've been accused of being a Seahawks fan on my channel, that's not the case. It's not like I dislike him either. I just don't really have a reason to cheer for him or against them. But Kenneth Walker, he's a good like home run hitter, but he's not really that good on plays where he doesn't score. He's actually really, really bad on plays where he doesn't score, because losing 1 yard or losing 2 yards can be really, really harmful to your offense and off your offensive drives in general. So yeah. Zach Charbonnet, he is kind of like the third down, like receiving back. Oh yeah, that's another thing, is that Kenneth Walker, he doesn't profile well as a pass catcher as well. Zach Charbonnet does, and he was much better on third downs than Kenneth Walker last year. And I don't know, Zach Charbonnet, he's a productive player. He's someone who definitely belongs in the NFL. But Kenny McIntosh, I'm curious to see if he gets his run this year. But yeah, overall, just not really sure what this team's going to look like. I think they will try to establish the run a little more to protect themselves from Geno Smith football. And even though they have a lot of passing weapons and more passing weapons than running weapons, and I know that's kind of like a no shit sort of thing, but yeah. So with the Chargers, the only thing that I have propping this team up, because overall talent-wise, I do believe they're a little thin in this room, because Gus Edwards is their projected RB1. He's not really that good anywhere besides the red zone. You give him the ball on the 5-yard line, hey, he'll punch it in. But J.K. Dobbins is a nothing burger at this point in his career, especially with all the injuries he's had, and especially with all the turmoil he's had to endure through his NFL career so far. Unfortunately, it looks like he's going to be a what could have been more than anything else, but Kimani Vidal is someone I'm really, really excited about. And honestly, I think Vidal is the best player in this room, like plain and simple. But also, you know that Harbaugh is going to try to establish the run. Like, that's how he won at Michigan. Granted, J.J. McCarthy in college is not as good as Herbert is in the NFL. And yeah, so I'm just not really sure what that looks like, but the Chargers are really thin on pass catching weapons this year as well. Lab McConkey and Palmer are pretty much the only guys you can rely on to give you any sort of meaningful production there. So you drafted Joe Alt. I think that symbolizes that the Chargers want to run the ball. Big year incoming for Kimani Vidal, in my opinion. Bobby Slowick. Now, they did add Joe Mixon this offseason. And again, running backs, they're all the same guy. Like, from Kamara to Mixon and all those older running backs that I had talked about earlier, like James Conner, in my opinion, they're all the same guy. Like Aaron Jones, they're all the same dude. They just changed teams, and that's what happened to the Texans with Joe Mixon. They did not have a very good run game last year. I know that once Singletary got going, things did get a little better for them, and they couldn't run the ball, so CJ Stroud was tossing it probably like 75 times a game. But this is a team whose offensive line is in for another kind of retool year, and hopefully they can protect CJ Stroud. But I was really surprised at how bad Dameon Pierce was last year, and kind of how he went from being one of the most promising young running backs in the NFL in 2022 to a guy who is on kick returns, who was returning kicks last year. And Jawar Jordan is someone who I'm pretty pumped about, because they don't really have a lot behind him. I know they have Daryl Gunbowale and some other guys sprinkled in there, but yeah, Mixon's probably going to have a big year in fantasy. if that's something you pay attention to, just because he is the RB1 on the Texans, and this team is supposedly going to score a lot. And this team is also probably going to be really good in general. But yeah, water break. Cincinnati Bengals. Zach Moss is now getting the chance to be an RB1, and he did last year when Jonathan Taylor went down because JT, not only was he holding out, but he had all those injuries to worry about. And Zach Moss, he did look pretty good, but oh, my nose itching. I don't know why. I think it's because I'm allergic to my cat. Um, Zach Moss, he did get his chance last year, and he looked pretty good. But I do have my long-term questions about what Zach Moss actually is, because he could not establish anything in Buffalo. Like, that was a pretty disappointing pick by Buffalo, and Singletary was pretty much the guy there for a while in Buffalo, but they never really had a good run game going once Josh Allen fully developed. More on that later. But they were 72nd, so 72% in 2023 run block win rate. I thought it was going to be lower because anytime I watched the Bengals last year, unless it was Jake Browning pulling something miraculous out of him, and Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase having those really good games against Arizona and San Francisco, I didn't really see a lot of good from this team. But Chase Brown, he can ball. Chase Brown is someone who I'm really pumped about. And if Chase Brown gets his chance to, catch a lot of passes, like, oh boy, that could be really good for this team. So I know you're probably just like, why is an Arthur Smith offense right here at number 15? The Steelers should be lower. Well, first of all, Najee and Warren, I do believe that they're like good-ish players. Like Najee, he's somebody who you can always rely on. He's just Ezekiel Elliott, but a little worse. Um, as far as what he's offered to the Steelers throughout his career. Like, I know rookie Zeke and Najee Harris do not even belong in the same conversation, but post 2020 Zeke and Najee are basically the same player. You know that they're going to give you some pretty good health. You know that they can catch passes when they're called upon to do so. You know that they can just fall into the end zone. But then behind him, you have the more explosive back. You have Tony Pollard. And in Najee Harris's case, you have Jaylen Warren, a guy who is a lot more explosive than Najee. Warren is not that good of a pure runner, but in the receiving game, this guy can really rip you to shreds. And Warren, he's a great missed tackles forced guy. And the reason I knew about Warren coming into the NFL in May 2022, I literally added him onto one of my dynasty rosters, was because I remember I was studying Dameon Pierce. I was looking at the missed tackles forced leaders in 2022 college football, and number one was Jaylen Warren. So I was like, it's interesting. He caught some passes and broke some tackles. I'm going to give this guy a shot. And I got a nice little value bump. And Warren has kind of pretty much already played Najee into only 2 downs, because Najee was a 3-down back when he was, considered one of the game's very best backs. But also, I'm surprised. I'm kind of surprised at how bad Najee has been in the NFL, considering running back is a position that translates pretty easily. But I don't know. That's interesting. Arthur Smith. So he does not know how to run an offense with Desmond Ridder and Marcus Mariota at quarterback. But I do think that if he had some semblance of an upgrade, because he was a guy who was able to coach Algier into being a good player, and Algier is a good player, but he was able to coach him into almost an 1,000-yard rusher, and he was able to. I know he mismanages his personnel, but at the same time, if you had given Arthur Smith Bijan Robinson 2 years ago, I think the Falcons would have done better because their O-line played better. And yeah, so the Steelers, they made a lot of upgrades on the offensive side of the ball. They drafted Fatanu in the first round, and they also signed Cordero Patterson, which this is kind of going to give me nightmares because, as you know, it sounds like I defended Arthur Smith there for the first minute, and I don't think it's the worst hire in the world by the Steelers, but when Cordero Patterson is getting jet sweeps on 4th and 3, I think I'm going to backtrack and take back everything I said. So with the Jets, your offensive play callers are Nathaniel Hackett and whatever Aaron Rodgers wants to do. But last year, Breece Hall went absolutely insane. the problem is they have nobody outside of Brees Hall. They don't really have anybody on offensive skill position as far as their offensive skill weapons outside of Brees Hall and or Garrett Wilson, as has been shown throughout those guys' tenure in the NFL. They haven't really had a lot of guys step up behind them. But the PFF preseason offensive line ranking of 5th is absolutely laughable. I've said this before. Like, why are we expecting, like, the Jets? This is a team that, from all their offensive ineptitude over the past, however long, like, I don't remember when this team was good on the offensive side of the ball, like 2015, maybe. This is a team that's offense is bad until proven otherwise. But the reason why I have them at 14 is because of Brees Hall. Brees Hall, in my opinion, is the second best running back in the game right now, only behind Christian McCaffrey. So that's a huge testament to him. And they do have some guys who were exciting in college. Like, I actually wasn't that excited about Braylon coming into the NFL, but Izzy Abanikanda is someone who I was wishing could show a little more. But those guys are kind of toast, and it's going to take something happening to Brees Hall, knock on wood, for them to even get snaps in the NFL. But Brees Hall, absolutely incredible player, so he kind of carried that ranking. Kevin Stefanski and the Cleveland Browns had their work cut out for them, because last year when Nick Chubb got hurt week 2, there were a lot of issues with the Cleveland Browns offense, and one of them was Kareem Hunt and Jerome Ford only getting like 3.5 yards per carry. Like, I don't remember how many times Jerome Ford ended the game with 14 carries, 48 yards, and a touchdown. Like, that's pretty much the typical Jerome Ford stat line from last year. And they just needed better running back play in general outside of what they got from Nick Chubb. And that's what they're going to need going forward. And I don't even know if Chubb is going to be healthy and or good again. But this is a team with a good offensive line. This is a team with a good coach. This is a team who added to their weapon group. Like, I know they added Jerry Jeudy, and they have Njoku and Amari Cooper, obviously. So hopefully that does help the run game get going, because that's ultimately what Stefanski likes to do. And if Deshaun Watson somehow magically turns good again, I don't think it's going to happen. I hope it doesn't happen again. This team could be better. This team could be better and very much outperform their ranking of 13. So, Chiefs. And the problem with the Chiefs is you don't really have a lot outside of Isaiah Pacheco, but Pacheco is a good runner, and I expect him to be really, really good in fantasy this year, because when you look at what he did last year without McKinnon, like, it was pretty good, and it was something that if you extrapolated out to a full season, he probably would have been a top 5 running back in fantasy football last year. But we're here to talk about the run game. We're not here to talk about fantasy football. But Pacheco is a good runner. He's pretty violent, and overall, he's just someone who's very much exceeded expectations to this point in his career. Now, the reason why I have them at 12th is because look what's behind him. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Deneric Prince, and Keontae Ingram. And honestly, those guys aren't really notable running backs. I just kind of had to put something there. But let's talk a little bit about each individually. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, massive bust. I know his calling card was supposedly, when he was coming out of LSU, being good in the receiving game, and everyone was really excited about him, especially because he was going to an Andy Reid offense, and they had never used that kind of capital on a running back. Hasn't materialized in the NFL. He's just not good enough to play in the NFL, or he's good enough to be on an NFL roster, but he's not good enough to, be a mainstay, and he's not good enough to get the ball in high leverage situations. Deneric Prince, can't body. Wasn't he at Tulsa? Can't body, bigger guy. Like, I'm pretty sure he's like 6 foot 230, but he runs really fast. And same with Keontae Ingram. Keontae Ingram was a good runner in college, and I don't know. I'm kind of a Keontae Ingram truther. So, preseason offensive line ranking 7th. You have May, Tooney, and Humphrey on the interior of the offensive line. So, the interior is pretty much crumble proof. Let's see what happens on the bookends. So, Shane Waldron with the Chicago Bears. He was with the Seahawks last year, and he was able to get some really good production out of Geno Smith when he was going through his career with the Seahawks, but they did add DeAndre Swift, and one thing that pleasantly surprised me about the Bears' rushing attack last year was, well, I know these numbers are going to be a little inflated, especially if you have a mobile quarterback of 4.5 yards per carry, which was 6th in the league, but I was pleasantly surprised with the play of Khalil Herbert, but they did add DeAndre Swift, so I don't think Khalil Herbert's going to get his chances. And Roshan was someone I really liked coming into the NFL, but once again, he's someone who really hasn't materialized. But the Bears have really added to their offensive line. Like, they already had Jenkins when Poles was the GM, and then they've added Darnell Wright. They've added a few other guys there, so hopefully they're better up front. Hopefully they can protect Caleb Williams because they're going to need a complementary run game. Even though Caleb has an embarrassment of riches, especially for being a first overall pick, they are going to need a complementary run game. But as far as what I think about DeAndre Swift and this rushing offense in general, I mean, what do I think about DeAndre Swift? I don't know. I literally don't have an opinion on the guy. I know he's kind of a polarizing player, or at least he was last offseason. He probably isn't as polarizing anymore, but he's a guy who he's pretty talented. So let's just see what happens when he's on Chicago this year. Now, the reason why I have the Cardinals at 10, you're probably just like, you're high, you're smoking crack. The reason the Cardinals are at 10 is because look at the Cardinals from week 10 when Kyler came back last year onward. The Cardinals from when Kyler came back onward had an incredible run game, and they were doing it with 45-year-old James Conner, Michael Carter, and Amari DiMercato. So that's a huge testament to the offensive coaching staff and a huge testament to Kyler in general because mobile quarterbacks do tend to make the running back more efficient because the team has to account for 2 running backs on every play, not just one. So the Cardinals, 72% run block win rate, despite having a very young and very thin offensive line personnel wise. And they did add Trey Benson, and as I previously talked about, Michael Carter and Imari DiMercato. But I'm expecting Benson to take over this backfield sooner rather than later. Um, Regardless, when this team is always running out of shotgun, one thing that really frustrated me with watching the Cliff Kingsbury, Kyler Murray experiment in Arizona was that it felt like Cliff Kingsbury was always giving Chase Edmonds or Kenyon Drake. It felt like he was always giving them the ball right up the middle every time, and they'd finish with like an 18 carry for a 60-yard game. And Connor, he's just one of these guys who just tends to produce, and we'll see how he is. We'll see how he is going forward. But yeah, I think the Cardinals' run game is not the best in the league. Like, I think they kind of overperformed when Kyler did come back, but I got to put some respect on their name just for that in general. 9, Falcons. Now, on the flip side to all the Arthur Smith defending I did last 10 minutes ago, you now have a coordinator who should be able to maximize what Bijan and Algier can do for you, because Bijan and Algier is a great 1-2 punch. Like, I firmly believe both those guys are good NFL running backs. Like, we know Bijan's good. He doesn't go 8th overall for a reason. I know it's the Falcons, but he still would have gone around there regardless, in my opinion. But with Tyler Algier, he's a guy who I really liked coming into the league. Definitely do not check my prospect video and what I called him 2 years ago. I literally said Tyler Algier was the best running back in the draft, and that draft included Breece Hall. So that shows how much I know about football. But this team, it has a good interior on the offensive line. You obviously have pieces like Lidstrom. You have McGarry as well. And now you're getting a chance to see Bijan in a Shanahan style scheme. So, wow, say that 3 times fast. Shanahan style scheme. So, and then say so afterwards. But yeah, I'm really, 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 really excited for Bijan going into next year because he's a guy who was drafted 8th overall, and that capital is absolutely crazy for a running back in the modern NFL. In this regime, the fact that they made an investment into him 8th overall, which I agree, egregious pick, it doesn't take away from the fact that they did it. It doesn't take away from the fact that a large part of the people involved in Bijan being the 8th overall pick are still with the team. Terry Fontenot is the GM, and he was involved in that as well. So as far as the running scheme, I have no idea what it's going to look like, but Bijan was someone who at points last year looked better than advertised, so that's really exciting. Now, with the Bills, the run game has never existed for this team until last year. Ever since Josh Allen developed, this team has had absolutely zero run game. They've had zero ability to control the clock late in games. Josh Allen extending drives with his legs has been what has been the Buffalo focal point of their run game for the past however many years. Until Joe Brady took over and they started winning games when they started using James Cook a lot more. Not only were they giving him the ball on the ground, but in the air, he was absolutely incredible when called upon. Now, Buffalo, they didn't have a lot at the position last year. I'll acknowledge that. They didn't really have that much in their running back room, but uh, besides, Ty Johnson, I believe, was their backup, and he's still a notable player because he has found a home on some NFL rosters here and there. Like, I know he was with the Jets here and there, and he was with Buffalo last year, carving out at least a decent little role. But Ray Davis, he's somebody you got to keep your eye on. He's somebody that Twitter nerds really like, so we'll see how that materializes. And they ranked 8th in the PFF offensive line rankings, as well as seventh in run block win rate. So I'm curious to see what ends up coming of the Buffalo Bills run game. And yeah, I think it's just going to be overall better. Like the end of the year numbers are just going to look better, especially because we get a full season of Joe Brady utilizing James Cook. The Rams and Sean McVay, he is a genius, no doubt about it, because when your running back room looks incredibly bare and the cupboard looks like it is drying up, you pull out a insane season from Kyren Williams. Now, Kyren Williams, he had an incredible year last year, but again, I still have my reservations about how good he actually is, because when you look at the Rams and you look at their running back room last year, it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. They had the 5th best run blocking line in the league as well. But back to Kyren Williams, the guys behind him were Royce Freeman, Ronnie Rivers, and Darrell Henderson. Guys literally got cut in the middle of last year, not even in training camp, not even in August, September for 53-man cutdown days. Guys literally got cut last year who were better than the Rams RB2. And Kyren Williams, he just happened to be right place, right time. Oh, shit. I forgot to put Zach Evans on here as well. But, oh well. He didn't really do anything his rookie year, so maybe he's not a notable running back, and he was the 6th round pick anyway. But, Kyren Williams, he had an incredible year, and he got pretty much all the work. He got, I'm pretty sure, 30 opportunities a game, which is insane for a round 5 running back in the modern NFL. But what they do this past year, they drafted Blake Corum, and overall, I think Corum was a better runner at Michigan than Kyren Williams was at Notre Dame. So this is going to be something that's pretty interesting because stylistically, Corum compares very similarly to Kyren Williams, and this is a team whose defense is going to be bad. So I honestly don't think they're going to be using their rushing attack that much this year, but when they are, I do think it's going to be very efficient. I do think it's going to be very cohesive, and once again, we know that Sean McVay can scheme something like no other. By the way, with Boston Scott, I did check, so you don't have to, and the Rams do not play the Giants this year. The Colts with Shane Steichen. Going into last year, they had a really tough running back situation because JT was holding out. I was pretty sure he was going to get traded at a certain point there. What else happened? Hull got hurt, so we didn't really get to see him in action. But Steichen was able to coach Zach Moss into being something, which is something that has not happened throughout his NFL career. So with Jonathan Taylor coming back and hopefully being able to rebound from the disastrous year that was 2023 for him, and the Colts had a good year despite losing their best offensive weapon last year. So I don't know, but the reason why I have them so high, part of it is, I'm not going to lie, part of it is Anthony Richardson, because this is basically like Jalen Hurts all over again, except this time he's 6'4", 250, and he runs a 4.45. Like, that's basically how I view Shane Steichen and the Colts offense, and you have Jonathan Taylor running next to him. That's pretty unfair. So they also have a really good offensive line, so things are materializing for this team's ground game to be really good. Shane Steichen's absolutely legit. So, yeah, the Lions. Their offensive coordinator is Ben Johnson. Was supposed to go to the Commanders. Don't really know what happened there. There turned out to be that giant mudslinging match of, well, we'll see. Uh, then Ben Johnson was like, well, I never actually really wanted that job, and the Commanders were like, well, we never really actually wanted him. I don't know. That was weird. But last year, they played pretty well. They ran the ball really well after drafting Gibbs 12th overall. And I thought it was a reach at the time. But you know what? This Lions regime, they clearly know what they're doing. So I'm not in a position to judge what they want to do. I'm not in a position to criticize them and complain for the stuff they want to do and how they want to run their team. Brad Holmes is a stud. And they did let Jamal Williams walk. And David Montgomery is now the guy they're using in the red zone as their bruiser instead. And Jamal Williams, you see what he looks like without the Lions now. He went to New Orleans and he's a complete nothing burger. And they gave the same contract the Saints gave to Jamal Williams to David Montgomery. And I support the idea of a bruiser in the NFL 100%. I know people want to see Gibbs get 2,000 yards and 29 touchdowns and replicate those great LaDainian Tomlinson days. And that'd be fantastic. And that'd be amazing. But here's the reality. When you look at how many teams struggle in the red zone these days in the NFL, and when you look at the overall quality of offenses and how we've had some really bad offensive play, I think David Montgomery is the biggest unsung hero of this Detroit Lions team and what they've done in their turnaround since Holmes and Campbell have taken over. And they have the best offensive line in the league. They are rated by PFF as the best O-line in the league. So I'm expecting really, really big things from the Lions next year because you have good running back, you have a healthy offensive ecosystem. Most of your games are played in the dome. Most of your games are played in some pretty solid weather, if there is any weather to begin with in general, because last year they had 14 games in good weather, and because they played the NFC South, but they play in a dome. Minnesota's in a dome. I'm kind of just going off on a tangent here. And they do have Craig Reynolds behind Demont Gibbs. I don't really know what he's going to look like. And who else did they have last year? Mo Ibrahim, who got carted off on his second career snap. Prayers up. Yeah, the Lions, I think fifth is an appropriate spot for them. Now, for the Dolphins, this is a team who the offense really, really relies on Armstead staying healthy, because if Armstead stays healthy, the sky's the limit for this run game. If A-Chain gets the ball and bounces to the outside, you're just not going to catch him, plain and simple. And when you're being schemed by Mike McDaniel and they're drawing up those exotic runs, you definitely know what's up. And Mostert was a great red zone back last year. I think he had 21 total touchdowns, but this team, it was pretty good when it came to run blocking and the offensive line, but Tua, man, he just really let this team down in the biggest games, and I'm not even going to shy away from it because I've been a long Tua defender, but they did add Jalen Wright for when it is time for Mostert to move on, so there's speed everywhere on this team. Let's just see if they can materialize. By the way, most yards per carry in the league last year. Shouldn't be a surprise, especially considering A-Chain was getting 75-yard runs every week, if not multiple. So that's pretty interesting there. Once again, the philosophy of this team runs through speed, and even if the run game is not efficient, it's going to be explosive, even though I do think the run game is going to be pretty efficient in general, which is why I have them ranked fourth. 3, Philadelphia Eagles. Now, you have Saquon Barkley running behind the Eagles' offensive line. I know they lost Jason Kelce, but still, this is a unit that's very stout up front. I'm interested to see what Kellen Moore's offense looks like, because the rushing attack really hasn't been there throughout his career on the teams that he's coordinated. And yeah, but personnel-wise, I just believe that the Eagles are just going to be really good at running with football. 2023 run block win rate first. They did lose Jason Kelce, but I think Jurgens is going to do just fine replacing him. Now, why I don't have them 1, especially because, oh yeah, by the way, Jalen Hurts is part of this too. And yeah, the tush push is not getting banned, so that's, I don't know, that's one less talking point for the NFL next year. But other notable running backs on the depth chart. Kenneth Gainwell. Kenneth Gainwell is somebody who's been, I think, kind of misused throughout his NFL career, and the Eagles just really haven't had a spot for him. But then they also got Will Shipley. I'm surprised he lasted until the 5th round, but he did. So, yeah, good offensive line with good players. Good things are going to happen. That's pretty much the simplest way I can put it. 2, 49ers. Now, Kyle Shanahan can scheme a rushing attack like no other, especially when you factor in that Christian McCaffrey is probably a top 3 running back of all time at this point. Yeah, I said it, top 3 running back of all time. And he had an incredible year last year. It mainly runs through his receiving ability. Like, that's what makes him otherworldly compared to some other running backs. But they also do have some guys on the depth chart I really like Mitch and Jordan Mason. 2 guys who, if they weren't on the 49ers, they would just probably be really, really productive backs on other teams. Like Mason in particular has just been buried by a super talented depth chart. And when McCaffrey is on your team, he's going to get the ball until he throws up. Elijah Mitchell has done really well when filling in for McCaffrey, though. And, like, McCaffrey does need a break, and he did very well in 2021 when he was the sole leader of the backfield. So that's just an interesting little tidbit there. But the one that sticks out to me is Isaac Guerendo, 4'3" at 230 pounds. Like, that's a Shanahan back if I've ever heard one. So, yeah. Regardless, Kyle Shanahan is still one of the best run schemers in the league. Their offensive line, it does need some work. They probably could have gone a lot further last year. I mean, I know that they were literally like a drive away from winning the Super Bowl. And I do think they would have gotten that if they had a better offensive line. And Kyle Shanahan was able to scheme up something smarter. And C, the offensive line was better. And yeah, so that does it for the 49ers. Just once again, this is a team that healthy offensive ecosystem, great coach, and then you just add in the fact that they have Christian McCaffrey. That's really all it is. Now, number 1, we have Lamar Jackson running next to Derrick Henry, and that's just plain and simple. That's why I have it number 1, because the quarterback, Lamar Jackson, does factor into the Ravens' rushing offense because of the kind of player that he is. But there's some other guys on this depth chart like Keaton Mitchell and Justice Hill. So if Henry cannot stay healthy, once again, knock on wood, it's going to be it's going to be pretty interesting to see what this team's scheme looks like, because it's probably, the rushing attack is probably very heavily predicated next year on Henry being the RB1. And I'm not surprised. But it remains to be seen how effective Henry is, because it seems like he did kind of tail off at the end of his time in Tennessee. But at the same time, this ground game could be otherworldly. And I'm really excited. I'm really excited to see Todd Monken be able to fully utilize Lamar Jackson, because Todd Monken last year, he said that Lamar Jackson had a unique ability. People were like, are you going to take away his ability to run the football? And then Todd Monken's like, what do you mean? That's still unique. And what did it reward him with? It rewarded him with an MVP season. So yeah, that does it for me. I know they did lose some guys on the offensive line. They lost 3 starters, but I do believe they're going to be fine up front in general. So yeah. As far as what's behind him, Keaton Mitchell coming off that torn ACL. Hopefully he can recover, because he looked really explosive by the time he got hurt, and Justice Hill is a nothing burger. I don't know. So that does it for me. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.